Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris and you're watching The Future is Female. This is the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. Joining me on the show tonight, I have Dr Mahaletchumy Arujanan. She is the Executive Director of the Malaysian Biotechnology Information Centre, or better known as MABIC. She's also the Editor-in-Chief of the Petri dish, which is Malaysia's first science newspaper. And in 2015, she was listed by the Scientific American Worldview as one of the world's 100 most influential people in biotechnology. It is a pleasure to host her on the show. Welcome to the show, Maha. It's nice to have you here.
Really, thank you so much, Melisa, for having me here.
Well, I'm delighted to talk to you, particularly because I think this is a time where everyone has felt the need to level up in terms of their scientific knowledge. We're living in a time of a pandemic. Suddenly everyone is an armchair epidemiologist, if I may say so. And I wanted to talk to you about your role as a science communicator. I find that fascinating because it's not a role that not one that comes to the forefront of the mind. You know, you're growing up, you're thinking, what do I want to be when I grow up? Science communicator isn't something you immediately think of. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your work, your role as a science communicator, and how you ended up being one.
Actually, I'll start with the last question. How did I end up in science communication? Without knowingly. Because as you said, I didn't grow up thinking I want to be a science communicator, not until I landed myself in MABIC, Malaysian Biotech Information Centre. And I didn't even know that the job calls for a science communicator. So I just followed the flow and I discovered there is a field called science communication. Right. And what surprised me is until today, people ask me, what is science communication and what do you communicate, what do you do?
Right.
Yeah, but then I think using the COVID as the example is an excellent example. You see the infodemic, the pseudoscience, the confusion. People don't understand how vaccines work. People don't understand about the virus. And this is where we need to communicate science. And we all know science is complicated. It is perceived to be difficult, right. And it is also perceived to be belonging to only some elite group, the scientists, those people who study science, and people find it boring as well.
Right. Is that the role of a science communicator, to take complex scientific concepts and research and breakthroughs and make it
palatable?
Palatable, easy to understand, accessible to the layperson. Is that the role of a science communicator?
Exactly. Okay. That's what exactly we do. But then I want to also elaborate the layperson that you said. Who are the lay people? Now, one sector of the lay people are the people in the LRT stations, in the mall, right. In the mosque, in the temple. They're all lay people. But then we have other high-ranking lay people as well, policymakers. Most of our policymakers who work in science-related ministries probably are not trained in science.
True.
And then we have politicians who develop the policies, who implement the policies, but they are also not trained in science. And media, like like you. So, so we want to communicate to all these people. There are also investors. Yeah. Today, for scientists, their funding grants do not only come from ministries, but also from angel funding, people who have
private sector.
And how do you make them see the value of the research so that they say, hey, look, you're doing such a great job and your technology is almost ready for commercialization. Let's talk. I want to put money into your research and take it to the market.
Right.
So for that, you see, for all these reasons, we need to communicate science.
So do you act as an intermediary between, say, okay, let me take an example of the policymaker, because I love that example. You know, you've got the scientists, the researchers, the academics, the people who understand the material. And then you've got the people making the decisions who may not be trained in this field, who may not understand. So do you act as a bridge, or do you teach them about this field? I mean, do you go to the policymaker, you've got to learn the science now, or do you tell the scientists you've got to come, you've got to be thinking like a policymaker? How do you make close that bridge, that gap?
Melisa, there is a field called science and society. It is part of science communication, but there ethics comes into play as well.
Okay.
So science and society, and that's what we do. We bridge science and society, but we must understand society is made of all these pluralistic stakeholders. So we do that. But then just one correction is, the word, we want to train you, we want to educate you. is something that can be demeaning, condescending.
Okay.
So imagine going to a politician and saying, we want to educate you on science.
They might not like that.
They
no.
will not like that. I mean, anyone will not like it. So it's not about educating, because we don't want to make everyone a scientist. So we just want to facilitate adoption. We want to facilitate R&D. We want to facilitate commercialization, and more importantly, we want to facilitate informed decision making. Just like how we want more people to register in My Sujatra, we want more people to come and say, I want vaccination. So for this reason, we just want to inform them, not really educate them, because we don't want to make someone else a biotechnologist. We don't want to make someone else a,
right.
That's not
possible. It's about informing. It's about sharing that information. Do you think that it's gotten a bit better during this time? Suddenly, as we were talking about COVID a little bit earlier, everyone has to up their scientific literacy a little bit. You have to learn and understand. Suddenly, everyone understands the spread of the virus. Is it gotten easier to do your work because everyone's a lot more open to receiving scientific information?
Certainly, it's a boon.
Okay.
I mean, yes, pandemic is not a nice thing, it's too ugly. But then for a science communicator like me, I'm seizing this opportunity to tell people, look, science is so important. And science is the one which is giving us the solution. And
right.
scientists are the one who's bringing the solution to us. So yes, pandemic has opened a lot of eyes, including the media, Melisa. Now, my a bit of a frustration is during the pandemic, you are bringing in epidemiologists, you are bringing science communicator like me, you are bringing in doctors. But I just hope the media will continue to put the limelight on science and scientists for many reasons. So yes, the pandemic has made everyone, including the politicians, to realize how important science is. Melisa, my Facebook increased by almost 3,000 followers during the pandemic.
Really?
Yep.
Everyone's interested in
yes,
science
and the Petri dish. You mentioned the Petri dish, the first science newspaper that I founded. The public started subscribing to it. So
good.
now people started seeing the value and why everyone has to be science literate. Yeah.
That's excellent. Okay. I wanted to ask you about Fame Lab, because I think that's really quite fascinating. It's the world's biggest science communication competition. I had no clue there was a competition to find, about science communication. Can you tell me a bit more? Because I understand you were a judge last year.
Yes, I was a judge last year, and I was also a judge one of the previous years.
Okay.
So Fame Lab is the biggest global science communication competition. Now, what they do is anyone can join, but usually those with PhD join. But then it could be media or STEM teachers, so anyone can join. You just have to pick up one science concept, or your research if you're doing research, and then decipher that to the non-technical audience. So reduce your all those technical jargons,
right,
and really explain a complicated concept or research or anything about science to lay audience. But it's only 3 minutes. So it's not easy, even for a science communicator like me. A lot of thought has to go into structure, to reframe your message, and to have a story as well.
It sounds deceptively simple. It sounds so deceptively simple. Take a scientific concept and explain it to a layperson in a few minutes. I think it was Albert Einstein that said, if you can't explain a concept to a 6-year-old,
to your grandmother,
it's likely that you yourself don't understand the concept. So that's quite fascinating. When you were, when you're working with Fame Lab, what is it that you're looking for, and what are the challenges people have trying to break down a scientific concept to a layperson?
Yeah, you see, I train researchers and postgraduate students and those in STEM, even policymakers, how to communicate science. And one of the biggest probably mistakes they do is the scientists come with so much of experience, right? Like 15 years of experience, 20 years of experience, 15 publications. So they feel like, hey, I'm so excited, I want to tell you everything. But I always tell them, no, the public, they don't want to know everything. If I'm a public, I just want to know, tell me if the vaccine is safe. Tell me if it is, what are the side effects. Tell me if it has got long-term effects. So they don't want to go into the details of how does a mRNA look like, how does the adenovirus look like. They don't want to know. So the common mistake in Fame Lab, the participants do, but I tell you, a lot of them do so well. And I'm so proud that Malaysia has got 2 global champions, 2016 and 2018. And that's why we want more Malaysian to be a global champion.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but not only FameLab, but every time scientists communicate, when we tell them dumb it down, they dumb it down so much until there's no science. So we don't want that, because as a science communicator, I can tell you the curiosity and the interest in science is there among the public, but we just have to repackage it in a way that resonates and it's relevant to them. So we don't want them to really trivialize science so much, but at the same time do not up it as well. Not too much of concepts, not too much of jargons. So it has to be, I always use this analogy of the three bears and Goldilocks.
Okay.
So Goldilocks goes and then she says, this is not soft enough, this is hard, this is just right. This is too hot, this is too cold, this is just right. So to scientists, I always say, get the just right amount of information, right amount of emotion, right amount of analogy, but I tell you it's not easy. But you need practice and then it can be done.
Right. Okay. Yeah. You have to kind of find the magic, the secret sauce, and find the right level of communication. Right. Balance the two. You said something about infodemic a bit earlier, about misinformation, particularly with the pandemic and with vaccines and the like. And I wanted to broaden that conversation to other polarizing issues like the environment, climate change, for instance. When you're a science communicator, how do you talk to people who who don't believe in the science?
I tell you what, a lot of people do not understand that we are living in the pandemic situation, and it's not so much about science communication, it's about risk communication. Because what's on the top of people's mind is not the benefits, it's about the risk. No one talks about, oh, if I take the vaccines, I'm going to be free of COVID. Yeah, there are people, but a lot of people, they are talking about the risk. So it's risk communication. And what is risk communication? It is a situation where the trust is low and the concerns are high. Can you see the double whammy? So people don't trust the government, people don't trust the doctors, people don't trust the pharmaceutical companies, and the concern is high that, oh, it might cost me this, it might cost me that.
I might get effects. Okay.
So it's a double whammy. So this is even more difficult than usual science communication, and this is where trust is the utmost important thing, that if I want to convince you, the first thing is I want to be your friend. Not, I'm a doctor, you have to listen to me, I'm a politician, no, it is the trust. So I must, when you trust me, I'm a big fan of this science communicator from US, and he always says, if you trust me, you don't need the science, because you are my friend and you will say, oh, Maha says this and I think it's right. If you don't trust me, no amount of science is going to change your mind as well. So in both ways, science is a secondary thing. The most important thing is transparency and trust. But how do we build that? And that is where science communicators like me come in and help those people who need all this messaging and say, okay, let's do this way, let's message it this way.
Oh, wow, you're opening my eyes up to a completely different step of the process. You're absolutely right about building that rapport first. It really is about trust. And when there's a deficit, how do you convince people, right? Okay, we're going to take a quick break, Maha, and we'll come back and continue this conversation in just a couple minutes. Stay tuned to The Future's Female. Welcome back to The Future's Female. I'm Melisa Idris. I'm chatting tonight to Dr Mahaletchumy Arujanan. She is the Executive Director of the Malaysian Biotechnology Information Centre, or MABIC. And we're talking about the importance of science communication, particularly during this time. And earlier in the show, you touched on building the interest, the natural curiosity that the public has, and using science communication to strengthen that. I understand that you work with children, school children, to build their interest in science and STEM subjects. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I feel like that is such important work, instilling the love for science at a very young age.
I think it's so important, Melisa, because I always give this example. Now, can you name me an OECD country, that means it's a developing country, but very weak science, technology, innovation? see, it's very difficult because
Right.
most countries which are OECD, their science, technology, innovation, and commercialization and research development are all top notch.
They're doing, yeah.
Yeah, so that is why we need to bring this science, infect it to our younger generation, so they fuel the economy and research, and so we don't become a borrower of technology. We want to be the innovator. Look at vaccines, for example. Now, do you know Vietnam is doing their own vaccines? Indonesia is doing their own vaccines, but we are still procuring from outside. So we need this so that the future generation become, they drive science and technology in Malaysia.
Has there been a decline in interest in science subjects by?
Oh yes, it has been a decline, and it is going downhill for many years. So now it's about 40. I think it's can even be lesser than 40% going to science stream compared to arts. Now, Malaysia was actually far ahead with our foresight, you see. Can you believe in 1967, Malaysian government at that time said that we want 60 to 40% ratio, science and arts.
Right. There was a big push for science,
that
right?
was 67. And I still remember I wrote a chapter for science communication in Malaysia for ANU, Australian National University Press, and they wanted to check back. Maha, are you sure it was 1969 Malaysia? Exactly.
The number right, yeah.
Because it was like way ahead of any other countries. I said, yes, we wanted that in 1967, implemented in 1970. But today we see that science students are still going downhill. And this is mainly because the industry is not there to absorb them when they graduate.
Okay, so they don't see a future in science, is that right?
And science is not seen as so glamorous. They don't see a role model. As I said, media should portray more successful science people in different fields. So for all these reasons, science is, students do not want to go into science stream. So what I do is, yes, I go to schools. So sometimes we approach schools ourselves. Sometimes schools invite us. There was one school in Melisa in Klang that the principal called me, and then they said, Maha, you know what, Dr. Maha, our students, we just finished PT3. All my students want to go to art stream, and these are eligible students. 29 eligible students want to go to art stream, and I'm trying to convince them, but they want to go. Can you come and give a talk? So I gave a talk on STEM and all the fascination of STEM field, the career opportunities, and out of 29, 19 said they're going to stay in science.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, what a high success rate.
Yeah, I was so happy. And until now, I do a lot of on my Facebook as well, talking about the opportunities, the fascination of science, so that people stay, these students, the eligible ones. We don't want to force the students who will struggle in science stream, but I think the eligible ones should stay in science until Form 4, because there are more doors open when you are in science. There's no reverse gear, Once you go to arts, you cannot come back to science. But from science, you can always go into economy and law and anything. So that's what I always tell students.
Okay, that's wonderful. I take your point about, I guess, having more representation of role models, right? I'm struggling to think of, I mean, in this time of a pandemic, we've had a lot of doctors come to the forefront. There's been a lot of spotlight on them, but we really need to highlight the accomplishments of more scientists in different fields of science. And I think I take your point on that. And I wonder whether that, in a small way, might help the younger generation see them, scientists represented. Many years ago, someone told me, well, I had the image in my head as a child, a scientist looks like Albert Einstein. Crazy hair, old white man in a lab coat. And it took me a long time to break that stereotype of a scientist. And it was only until I saw representation of women, of
stylish women.
Yes, stylish, feminine, young people in the lab, young people making scientific breakthroughs, that I changed my perception of what a scientist looked like. And I have to say, it was much older than I would like to admit.
Melisa, I think today we have many successful women doing great job in all areas of science, including engineering, construction, IT. But as I said, media should highlight them and make them the role model, because if you ask a student, they always have a role model either from the celebrity or from the movie or from the business world.
Yep. So it's always kind of pop culture role models, right?
Yeah. So I would say we have, but we need to highlight and bring them to the forefront.
Okay. One of the things that I've loved particularly, and I see this as a silver lining of the pandemic and working from home, is the number of webinars that we've been having and focusing on women and women's accomplishments, having more women speakers. You were part of this webinar that I saw on women in science, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes, in STEM, yes.
That's right. So we organized that for British Council.
Okay.
And that's very exciting to me because that is actually British Council is giving scholarship to women to pursue a master's in certain areas in STEM and by 3 selected UK universities. But the unique point about this scholarship is that any married woman with children, they can bring their children and support is given. I think this is really great because you know what, Melisa, there's a huge difference between arts and science when you want to pursue postgraduate and PhD, masters and PhD, because in science we have to be in the lab. For arts, you see MBA,
yes.
You can go virtual, you can
Right.
go on a weekend, but science, you have to go and do sampling, you have to go and make sure your bacteria is growing, you take the count and you know all those things, titration and all those things. So you can't leave your lab. So and
there's a lot of practical work involved, right?
yeah,
Yes.
so which means you have to be away from your home, especially if you intend to go overseas. And this is where women with children, you can bring your children wherever you
that's
go into to
wonderful.
the 3 UK universities and support is given. And I think this is amazing.
I think it's wonderful that that challenge is being addressed. You know that I think the science community has identified that this is one of the reasons that's holding women back from
Yes.
applying for postgraduate studies. That you know that they have to make this decision. I love that. Are you seeing an improvement, Maha, in terms of the equality for women in science, you know, in terms of opportunity, in terms of how the field is treating women in science? Has there been an improvement?
I would personally say that Malaysia is not too bad because if you look at even US, the grant that female researchers receive is lower than the male researchers. And then there's also, it could be happening in Malaysia as well, where women are sidelined when a group of, in a team, women work together to do the research. Women might go to the back of the list as in the author. You know, we publish papers and then there's a whole list of authors and women might be at the back. But I think Malaysia probably, it's not too rampant,
bad.
but then women have to speak up. But what I see is, as I said, science is a bit different because science is a field that rapidly advances. And if you're out of it for 2 years, if you say, okay, I've got a child, I've got an aging parent, I want to be out, I want to go, leave the career, leave the market for 2-3 years, come back, then you will be. It is difficult for you to catch up because technology might have changed. So these are the unique challenges for women in STEM.
How do we address that? You know, I mean, that seems to me like a bigger structural issue, but that's a valid point. And I'm glad that you've taken the time to identify where it is that women face particular challenges when it comes to working in STEM, in science fields. Have you thought about how we can perhaps make things better for a future generation of women?
Now, yes, of course, but then it's not easy. But then there are solutions. But you know, I feel everyone should come together. Of course, the first is top-down approach, where the government. So I am an outlier. So I always feel like, okay, people are talking about baby care centers and all these things. But how about with aging parent? Can I leave my mother? I actually stay with my mother stays with me, and it's not easy because older people, they tend to be stubborn and they tend to do things on their their own things. So I need to always keep an eye on her. So can I leave my mother somewhere when I'm going for a meeting or when I travel? Can I leave her somewhere? So I think that just not babysitters, but we need gerontology centers as well, where I can, older parents, someone is taking good care of them. So I don't think anyone is talking about that. Now, the other one is the support system at home. I don't have sons, but I always tell my sisters and my friends who have got sons, I said, please teach your son to do housework. Please teach your son.
Yes, equality begins at home.
Exactly. So that support system has to be there, where man feels that my wife has got the same dream as me. She also aspires to do well in career. She wants a social standing as well. So I think it's time that men feel that way and support the wife in what she wants to do. So but for the girls as well, I will tell the girls, please don't just choose your boyfriends and say, hey, he's so cute, he's so funny, but that's not going to last long. So choose someone who is responsible, talk about your dreams from day one and say, hey, look, I'm going to be working all the time. So I think that is all very important.
Yeah. Maha, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I've learned so much. And I will do my part as being in the media to make sure that I highlight more women in science. And I think it's an important thing. So perhaps we'll have more role models and we'll have more representation.
Thank you, Melisa. I think media should take up this responsibility.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure. All right, that's all we have for this episode of The Future is Female. I will join you same time next week for another episode. I'll catch you then. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.